The Battle of Wireless Ridge was an engagement of the Falklands War which took place on the night from the 13th of June to the 14th of June 1982, between British and Argentine forces during the advance towards the Argentine-occupied capital of the Falkland Islands, Port Stanley. Wireless Ridge was one of 7 strategic hills within 5 miles of Stanley at 51 degrees 40 minutes 14 seconds south, 57 degrees 55 minutes 55 seconds west, 51.67056 degrees south, 57.93194 degrees west, minus 51.67056. minus 57.93194 that had to be taken in order for the island's capital to be approached. The attack was successful, and the entire Argentine force on the island surrendered later that day. The British force consisted of 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, a troop of the Blues and Royals, with 2 FV-101 Scorpion and 2 FV-107 Scimitar light tanks, as well as artillery support from 2 batteries of 29 Commando Regiment Royal Artillery and naval gunfire support provided by HMS Ambuscades 4.5-IN gun. The Argentine force consisted of the 7th Infantry Regiment and detachments from other units. The first Argentine unit to arrive in the sector was that commanded by José Rodolfo Banetta that took up residence inside the Moody Brook Barracks. But this unit had to evacuate the area on the 11th of June when British fire struck the building, killing 3 conscripts and wounding the Argentine major. At first, the 7th Regiment on Wireless Ridge was relatively comfortable, shooting sheep and roasting them on an old bed frame the soldiers had found nearby. Private Guillermo Vélez maintained that he personally shot and killed 50 sheep during his time on Wireless Ridge. Background: after heavy losses during the Battle of Goose Green, including their commander, Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones, command of 2 Para passed to Lieutenant Colonel David Chandler, who was in England at the time of the battle. Chandler flew to Ascension Island on a Vickers VC-10 and then to the Falklands on a C-130 Hercules that was dropping supplies by parachute. Chandler jumped into the sea, where he was picked up by helicopter and eventually delivered to HMS Hermes for a briefing with Admiral Woodward and then to Major General Jeremy Moore's headquarters. 4 days after Goose Green, Chandler joined 2 Para. After debriefing the battalion's officers about Goose Green and the events following, he vowed that the unit would never again go into action without fire support. From Fitzroy, 2 Para were moved by helicopter to Bluff Cove Peak where they were held in reserve. The first line of hills, 2 Sisters, Mount Longdon and Mount Harriet, were taken. 3 other hills were then slated to be captured: Mount Tumbledown by the Scots Guards, Mount William by the Gickas, and Wireless Ridge by 2 Para. The final phase, a 3 Commando Brigades campaign, the Battle for Stanley, would follow the capture of these hills. On the morning of the 13th of June, it became clear that the attacks on Tumbledown had been successful, so 2 Para marched around the back of Mount Longdon to take up their positions for the assault on Wireless Ridge. As the action was expected to be concluded quickly, they took only their weapons and as much ammunition as possible, leaving most other gear behind in the camp. On Bluff Cove Peak, the battalion's mortars and heavy machine guns were attacked by Argentine Force Skyhawks, which delayed their planned move forward, although they suffered no casualties. Initial assault. In the closing hours of the 13th of June, D Company began the attack sequence, advancing upon Rough Diamond Hill northwest of Mount Longdon. It had been hit by an intense barrage from British guns, from land and sea. In the preceding 12 to 14 hours, British artillery had fired 6,000 rounds with their 105mm pieces, and as they began the push, they were further backed by naval fire and the 76 and 30mm guns mounted on the light tanks. The approximately 80 casualties sustained by two para 2 weeks earlier at the Battle of Goose Green had induced them not to take any unnecessary chances the second time around. The Argentine commanding officer, Lt. Col. Omar Gimenez, says that 3 or 4 times he was nearly killed by a direct hit during the softening up bombardment. When decoy reached the hill, they found that the Argentine Compania C of the 7th Infantry Regiment had withdrawn due to the heavy bombardment. As Major Philip Nemes' decoy started to consolidate their position, the Argentine 7th Regiment launched a series of heavy recoilless rifle, rocket and mortar attacks on Mount Longdon, causing casualties to the 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. With this massive fire support, A and decoys were convinced the enemy on their apple pie feature had been defeated, and began to advance confidently. But they met fierce resistance when they left their trenches. They came under heavy machine gun fire. Massive retaliation was initiated by the British machine gunners and the guns of the Blues and Royals light tanks. One Mount Longdon survivor from 3 para recalled the British attack, which was initially repulsed by the Argentines. They tried going over the top first, but the incoming fire was too heavy, so they went back behind the peat and waited for more artillery to soften them up. The Argentine defenders there eventually withdrew in the face of such withering fire, and A and B decoys took their objective. By this stage of the battle, there were not many experienced Argentine officers left. The forward artillery observation officer, the operations officer and the Compania A and C commanders and at least 3 senior platoon commanders were wounded. Decoy then moved down from their northern start line to advance to a position east of Wireless Ridge, where they found a platoon position to be unoccupied. By about 4:30 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel Jimenez knew that the 7th Infantry Regiment had been decisively defeated. Communications are lost. My whole regiment is finished, but other attached units continued to fight. Final assault. Decoy then began the final assault from the western end of Wireless Ridge, under the cover of heavy fire from HMS Ambuscade's 4.5-inch gun, tanks, 12 105mm artillery pieces, several mortars and anti-tank rockets. Earlier Argentine GHQ had sent the dismounted 10th Panhard AML Squadron to make a reconnaissance foray into the western rocks of Wireless Ridge. Captain Rodrigo Soloaga was particularly effective in persuading his men to engage the British light tanks, Milan platoon and the machine gun platoon on Apple Pie, while the 7th Regiment's HQ sorted themselves out. In 2 hours the cavalry unit suffered 5 dead and about 50 wounded. Major Nemes' decoy took the first half of the objective after a hard fight with Argentine paratroopers from 2nd Lieutenant Gustavo Alberto Aymara, platoon of the 2nd Airborne Infantry Regiment, with ex-para Tony Banks later writing about the engagement. The word was given to advance and we scrambled through peat bogs and what we later learned was a minefield. We reached the first enemy trenches, but there was nobody there. They'd bolted. But as we started out along the ridge, a scene from Star Wars erupted with tracer rounds flying everywhere. We were up against well-armed, well-disciplined and highly motivated enemy soldiers in good positions. Nemes' company suffered 2 killed before being able to overrun Aymara's men, but then came under fierce attack from Major Guillermo Bereze's Compania A of the 3rd Regiment, which had tried to move forward to Mount Longdon during the fighting 2 nights earlier but had only reached Moody Brook Valley. With Lieutenant José de Brevic's 81mm mortar platoon providing fire support, the company, in the form of the platoons of Sub-Lieutenant Carlos Javier Aristiga and 2nd Lieutenant Victor Rodriguez Perez, advanced to contact. Private Patricio Perez, who had just left school, recalled the unnerving experience of 66mm rockets coming straight at him like undulating fireballs. He believed he shot a British paratrooper, possibly 12 platoons commander, and became enraged when he heard that his friend, Private Horatio Benitez from his platoon had been shot. The platoon of 2nd Lieutenant Rodriguez Perez in fact closed with the British 12th Platoon, under the command of Lieutenant Jonathan Page. The fight surged back and forth. Lieutenant Page managed to hold the line, but only just. Major General John Dutton Frost of the British Army describes the resulting attack on 12th Platoon. For 2 very long hours the company remained under pressure. Small arms fire mingled with all types of high-explosive rifle grenades fell in and around 12th Platoon's position as the men crouched in the abandoned enemy sangars, a type of fortification, and in shell holes. According to Major Neame, then from the east we got this counterattack. John Page, whose platoon I had left up that end, did a really bloody good job. He managed to get hold of our artillery by flicking his radio onto their net, as we were still without our foo. That broke up their attack. Major Neame's officers and NCOs rallied the men to capture the final part of their objective, and in the face of heavy fire, the Argentines, having run out of ammunition, broke and retreated under the covering fire from the supporting machine gun fire, controlled by Lieutenant Horatio Alejandro Mons Ruiz of Perez's Campania. Privates Esteban Triz and Lupin Sarazuela of Rodriguez Perez's platoon volunteered to stay behind and rescue their wounded platoon sergeant, Manuel Villegas, laboriously carrying him to Port Stanley. Private Michael Savage and other survivors from Campanusi were the first 7th Regiment troops to reach the relative safety of Port Stanley, only to be greeted with shock and disdain, he recalls, by immaculately dressed staff officers. They had been sleeping in houses, in warm beds. They had shiny shoes, pristine ironed uniforms and waxed moustaches. They even had heating in their cars. I was so furious with them. The battle was not over yet. One of the Argentine Army staff officers that Private Savage talks about, the 10th Brigade operations officer, during the pre-dawn darkness of the 14th of June, was seen driving around in a jeep marshalling tired, panicky and dazed soldiers from various units into a company and led them into Stanley's western sector under heavy fire. Some 200 Wireless Ridge survivors had been rallied by Dalton to form, under heavy gunfire, a last-ditch defensive line in front of the now silenced guns of the 4th Airborne Artillery Group near the racecourse, near the church in Stanley, intent on helping Perez. Major Carrizo Salvador's, second in command of the 7th Regiment, helped by the chaplain Father Jose Fernandez, mustered about 50 Wireless Ridge survivors and led them on a bayonet charge, with the soldiers chanting their famous Malvinas March, but were stopped by heavy artillery and machine gun fire. The Paras were momentarily alarmed and watched surprised, with Major Philip Neame describing it as quite a sporting effort, but one without a sporting chance. Major Neame later gave more details. Then as daylight began we got another counter-attack, this time from the Moody Brook side onto Sean Webster's platoon. I thought, bloody hell, what's going on around here? I wondered what we had got into and thought that this was most unlike the Argentinians. For a while they were quite persistent. The 2 Para had suffered 3 dead and 11 wounded. The Argentines suffered approximately 25 dead and about 125 wounded, and about 50 were taken prisoner. In the final stages of the battle, Brigadier General Jaffa had been offered the use of Skyhawks to bomb Wireless Ridge with napalm but declined in the belief that the British response would be commensurate. For the bravery shown at Wireless Ridge, 2 Para was awarded 3 military crosses, 1 military medal and 1 Distinguished Conduct's Medal. 29 Commando was awarded 1 military cross.